travel around with his consort, Helen or Helena, and he claimed that she was the incarnation of the Ennoia, the first thought, basically the Logos, the great power, the great God, in other words, and that he had dived into the maelstrom of the material world to find and redeem her. So that symbolized his saving mission to redeem all the Gnostics, the pneumatikoi who had the spark of the divine spirit and could be brought back to heaven. Could that be Simon Magus in the role of the woman anointing Jesus?
Dr. Robyn Price. I have a fan who's helped out Anthony Golden. He's a patron. He has a question for Dr. Bob. A couple questions. First one is, could the letter to the Hebrews' heavenly high priest Jesus be a development from Zechariah's high priest Joshua? And the second question, another question for Dr. Bob after he elucidates his expert perspective. The story of Jesus and the woman caught in adultery really fascinates me. It's clear that it's an interpolation, as you stated in your excellent book, Holy Fable 2. But I'm fascinated by the fact that it was added to Luke and not just John. So it was being passed around before the Gospels were put into writing. Could this story have been another person other than Jesus? He says, I've been wondering about whether it may have been another instance of Simon Magus or another Gnostic disguised as a Christian hero. Thanks. Thanks, Anthony, for the question.
Well, as to the first part, there's so many people named Jesus because they're named after Joshua, a major Old Testament hero, that the agreement on the name it doesn't mean much necessarily. There is the element of the vision in which, Zechariah or Haggai, I can never tell them apart, they kind of parallel, speak of seeing the Satan accusing Joshua, of being unworthy of the office of high priest for which he's been nominated. And we don't know what it was he did, but it's symbolized by him having a stained robe. So the Satan brings him up before God and says, look at this guy, he's not what you want. And then the angel of Yahweh intervenes and says, Yahweh rebuke you, O Satan. Then, like he did with Isaiah, God purifies Joshua, so all is forgiven. Boy, that sounds like political propaganda to me. So what if he's guilty? God says he's okay. Well, anyway, but the fact that you've got those characters in the scene might imply this is supposed to be in heaven. But I still think it's pretty tenuous. Well, you're saying it might be a development from it, not just a retelling of it. That's possible, but to me, it remains speculative. It's kind of a possibility. It's plausible, but there's not that much to go on.
So pertaining to, and now you're talking about the Gnostic connection here, or are you talking about the Joshua connection?
Joshua and the idea of heavenly.
That's what I was thinking.
High priest.
I do think it's interesting in his second question in particular, though, the way that he's taking that. This woman caught in adultery.
Yeah.
If there was a woman caught in adultery, would this Jewish rabbi be running around, acting like, put your stones down, guys. It's okay. She just committed adultery. Just don't do it anymore. Like, would that have been a thing? And I mean, it's a good question to ask, but you also have this Simon Magus character with Helena and the brothel. Can you tell us about that and how this might, who knows,
Yeah, the Simon Magus traveled around with his consort, Helen or Helena, and he claimed that she was the incarnation of the Ennoia, the first thought, basically the Logos, a synonym for that, or Sophia, and that she fell somehow into the world of matter and was reincarnated many, many times, including as Helen of Troy. And Simon was the great power, the great God, in other words, and that he had dived into the maelstrom of the material world to find and redeem her. And finally he did, down the ages, when he found Helen's latest incarnation as a prostitute in a brothel, and sort of like Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver, rescuing her. And so that symbolized his saving mission to redeem all the Gnostics, the pneumatikoi, who had the spark of the divine spirit and could be brought back to heaven. Well, so imagine he's got this woman he travels with who is an ex-prostitute. Some people, of course, just could not brook that. Redemption to them didn't lead to unsavory stuff like that, and maybe he's making it up anyway, or just excusing his, like Judas says to Jesus, it's not that I object to her profession, but she doesn't fit in well with what you teach and say. It doesn't help us if you're inconsistent. They only need a small excuse to put us all away. Well, it could be that. Like they frowned on this, and some of the Christian apologists that talked about Simon said, "Look at this guy and his story made up to cover this." Well, it could be, you can well imagine that the character in that story is Simon, who also, we're told by Irenaeus, thought the law was given by the archons, not from God, which you also read about in Galatians, and so the law is not binding on the Gnostics, and therefore some people said he was a libertine. You could either go libertine or ascetic, depending on which way you wanted to depart from the norm. And if you picture this as Helena, who's been dragged out of the brothel for some reason, and a bunch of men say, "We don't want filth like this in our town. She's had multiple sex partners. Shouldn't we stone her to death, don't you think?" Let's see what he'll do. Is he really going to follow the law? And Jesus or Simon doesn't actually answer that directly. He said, "Well, if you're set on stoning her to death, why don't you start with the one of you who's never sinned?" Nobody can pick up the first rock because nobody can make that boast, so he slides out of it. He doesn't rule on it one way or the other. And then he looks up, they're all gone. Well, lady, why don't you just get out of here and don't sin again? That could be because it's the indifference to the law, the questionable character of the woman. Nobody denies she's guilty, but he does say leave. She doesn't become his consort in this version. So again, that's kind of creatively speculative. Let me give you a similar example that Hermann Dettering came up with in his great book, The Falsified Paul, also known as The Fabricated Paul, where he says he thinks the solution to the riddle of the gospel story of the anointing, where it says that they were in the house, I think it's Mark 14, they're in Bethany in the house of Simon the leper. And this woman anoints Jesus, and she's criticized by all these people, and he defends her. Dettering says, "Simon the leper? Why would anybody, even if you were a cured leper, would you really go around with that epithet?" It makes me think of Monty Python. "Alms for next leper? Did you say ex-leper? That's right, sir. Jesus of Nazareth cured me. So much as by your leave. Anyway, great scene. There's no pleasing some people. That's what Jesus said, sir. That ought to be in the Bible. But the thing is, suppose this is Simon Magus, because in, I think it's the Apocalypse of Elijah, one of these pseudepigraphical books, it says when the Antichrist comes, one of the signs will be that he's a leper. And so Dettering said, Simon the leper is in his house. Could that be Simon Magus in the role of the woman anointing Jesus? Well, we know what some people made of that, because in Luke's version, she's a prostitute. And they're saying, if this guy were really a prophet, he'd know what kind of floozy he's dealing with here. He's a fake. And that could kind of have been the point of the original. I find that pretty compelling. I mean, I don't know if it's true, but it does solve one problem, and it makes sense to me. And this, what you're suggesting, is kind of like that. So I have to take it a bit more seriously, but ultimately, who knows?
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, join MythVision's Patron not only to support us, but there are 72 videos that I did with Dr. Dennis R. MacDonald and Richard Carrier, all on the Patreon, early access. You guys can ask personal questions when I go to interview these scholars, and you're helping MythVision grow.